Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another session. And today we've got Anjali and Philip with us. But before we start, if we could just confirm that we're not just speaking to ourselves. If you can hear us, if you can see us, just say hi in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. We'll just give them a minute, Anjali, Philip, and once we've just got confirmation that there are people, we move ahead. In case we don't hear from them, that's fine. We'll just start.
Great, sounds good.
Thank you, Tushar.
I can see quite a few people have joined in numbers over here, but if anyone can just comment and confirm that, that would be helpful. Getting quite a few numbers. I think that's fine. Let's go ahead and start. Uh, so, Anjali Philip, would you like to start by introducing who you are?
Hello, everyone. I'm Anjali Jain. I currently work as an enterprise AI architect at Metro Bank. Other than that, I work on two other parallel tracks. So I'm also the CTO and co-founder of Adosh Research Limited, which reskills people, and we have B2C as well, where we work with universities for reskilling students, etc., on AI. And other than that, I teach at Oxford. I'm actually doing that for past 6 years on AI and machine learning courses, and I have three children. So that's all about me. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you. I've worked as an architect across consulting, Formula One, oil and gas, and financial services for longer than I care to remember, but almost 30 years. I've had a long-standing interest in using technology to provide better outcomes and, well, improved decision-making. For my master's thesis, I did a thesis on using deep neural networks to understand whether a transaction between two parties would have a high probability of success. But of course, since then, foundation models have, of course, changed the question from producing decisions to making decisions. So the shift is something that Anjali and I have discussed at length. We've worked together for a number of years, and it's actually the motivation for writing the book. So today I'm looking forward to sharing some core ideas from the book. The book is a mixture of theory, but mostly practical patterns. So looking forward to the questions and looking forward, hopefully, to answering them. Back to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Philip, and thanks, Anjali. I think it's a good segue to the question that I have prepped first. But before I take that on, I can see that a few people have commented. So on LinkedIn, Jacob says it. Hi, I'm Jacob from Denmark. Hi, Jacob. Hi, Dipesha, and hi, Shola. There are three comments on LinkedIn. Thank you. Just a reminder before we move ahead, for everyone watching us live, there are a couple of giveaways, as you can see at the bottom on the ticker. You can win Architecting for Autonomy, the book that Anjali and Philip are writing. Just comment hashtag AI in the chat, and we'll do a couple of giveaways somewhere in the middle part and one towards the end. So let me take up my first question, which was a brilliant segue from what you said last, Philip. What is your book, Architecting for Autonomy, about?
Yeah, good question. Shall I start?
Of course.
Okay, well, as I said in my intro, I've been architecting for a number of years. And for the decades that I've been involved, we've designed systems that execute decisions. But of course, as I mentioned with agentic AI, we must now design systems that make decisions.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of innocuous when you say it like that, but ultimately the decision-making has shifted right.
Yeah.
And so if the decision-making has shifted right, architecture has to evolve, because architecture is all about an organization defines a business strategy. An architect defines a baseline understanding of where the organization currently is, a strategic state that needs to be reached in order to achieve the business strategy. And then we chunk it into transition states, which are just bite-sized chunks of the target state that we can bite off within the organization's capacity to change. But effectively, we've designed blueprints. And then when the blueprints are designed, the governance process is over. They're built in runtime, and operations takes over. The decisions haven't necessarily been architectural concerns once the governance process is finished. But of course, that was when the decisions lived outside of the value stream. But if we're bringing decisions within the value stream that as architects were designing, then by definition, they become architectural concerns. And when they become architectural concerns, we need to be able to design systems through the entire life cycle. And of course, when we're delegating autonomy to non-human agents that have the capacity to make autonomous decisions, that continues through for the life cycle of the solution. So we therefore need to govern both the agents and the autonomy itself. And that's effectively the thesis of the book, that although architecture as a discipline isn't fundamentally changing, it's still baseline, transition, target. The elements of the system and the subsystems that we're designing have changed, and therefore we must evolve to meet those changes.
And like Philip had rightly explained, our book is about architecting for autonomy. And why it is named so? The reason being, it is agnostic of the domains, it is agnostic of the implementation techniques, or what models, what agents you use. They keep on changing. But the core architectural patterns which you need, because autonomy has now entered the organization, remains the same. That's why we use foundation for autonomy, and also we use very principles of autonomy, which we will answer in further questions.
Exactly. And I mean, we're all familiar with different frameworks. Almost a rite of passage for an architect when they become an architect is to get TOGAF certified. And TOGAF talks a lot about the architecture vision. And there's a well-known enterprise architecture book called EA as Strategy. Mm-hmm. And with EA as Strategy, the authors define a state called Foundation for Execution. And Foundation for Execution was really built upon technologies that existed at the time. And the authors were very focused on optimizing an organization to achieve, a strategic architect vision where the organization could work highly efficiently. And so that could incorporate service-oriented architecture or reusable services, etc. And so what we're suggesting with Foundation for Autonomy is that we need to build upon that foundation for execution and extend these concepts so that the ability to run agentic AI safely in an organization is both considered for, designed, and therefore scaled at enterprise level.
And it's quite an interesting thing that you mentioned, like, you ended towards the enterprise bit of it, and even Anjali mentioned about the autonomy happening. But this actually leads me to my next question, that we see a lot of enterprises struggling to move from AI pilots to real autonomous systems. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and pilots, of course, are almost protected bubbles that exist where many people inside the bubble are very committed to making the pilot successful. And from my experience, when pilots fail, it's not because the technology itself has failed, but it's that scaling the objectives of the pilot to an enterprise level maybe wasn't considered in its entirety when the value proposition for the pilot was defined. For example, governance costs in agentic AI could possibly exceed the savings or the value that the solution is going to realize. Within the book, we address this through what we call the agentic economic canvas. Yeah. And what the agentic economic canvas tries to do is to really remeasure pilots early in the process through fundamental concepts such as a decision surface, where you take a very granular approach to what is the business objective? What is it that we're trying to achieve by injecting agentic AI into this value stream? And have we got a complete understanding of the decision surface that we're modeling so that we can have a clear understanding of the value that's going to be realized? We also make assumptions within the agentic economic canvas that there is going to be a net minus value realized for a significant period of time, because what happens with many pilots is when you're the first initiative within an organization to implement enterprise capabilities to support significant enterprise change. As a pilot, you may get taxed for implementing those enterprise capabilities. And so within the canvas, we have methodology for being able to factor those costs in so that the value proposition can either be bundled into several use cases or take a more holistic approach to actually what it is that the pilot itself is going to be delivering. Also, I think autonomy, delegated authority itself, sometimes a mistake is made that this is a lever that you switch on, but actually it's a dial. And so if the value isn't realized quickly, you can adjust the dial so that actually the scope of the pilot is scaled down so that you can implement it in a gradual phased manner. And then as the organization matures with its capabilities, then you can start to realize more and more benefits from it. So that, to answer in my usual extremely long way, there are multiple reasons that pilots fail. But when significant technology shift has happened to the degree that agentic AI and foundation models are supporting, generally it means significant capabilities need to be brought into an organization to support it. And that comes at a cost both to the operating model and to the CapEx budgets of various areas within the functions to actually support the underlying technology. And if you try and penalize pilots for those foundational capabilities, then the value case won't stack up.
Perfect.
And just to add to whatever Phil has mentioned, so when we talk about pilots, proof of concepts, or proof of value, whatever name you want to call it, they are always in a protected bubble. So the way we want to design them, as if we are working on a chessboard, which has all the valid rules defined, everything predefined and determined, but giving it an autonomy. So we want to prove basically that the technology or the agentic framework is working. But what we are missing is that when we go into real world, is actually you're given an autonomous car to drive and not a chessboard where pedestrians can come in and you have to shift into another lane and all those. So when pilots are designed, they are designed and remove all the necessary framework or the governance or architecture around it. They are mainly focused on proving the technology instead of proving the business case, etc. That's why they nearly failed.
Thanks for that, Anjali. I can see a couple of people have taken note of what's happening down in the ticker, and they are at an odds of 50-50 to win the raffle. And in fact, there are two raffles, so both of them are going to win a copy. So I can see 28 people are live on all different platforms combined so far. Uh, just comment hashtag AI. There's nothing to lose. In fact, you stand a chance to win an early access copy of Architecting for Autonomy. Look at the ticker down there. Just comment hashtag AI. I'll do one raffle in the middle and one towards the end. So there's one interesting thing I noticed that we, since the time we started a conversation, and that's where my next question is leading to. We started with automation, autonomy, uh, co-pilots, pilots, and then Anjali, again, you mentioned autonomy towards the end of answering the last question. Uh, what is the difference between them three? What is the difference between autonomy, automation, autonomy, and co-pilots?
So automation is giving a system ability and authority to execute predefined decisions. I have
Yeah.
used my words of choice very carefully. So you are saying we are saying here deterministic paths. We
Mhm.
are giving kind of very low or no autonomy, and there is no human in the loop. That's what we are trying to achieve with automation, right?
Mhm.
Where decisions are predetermined and there is no human, and we can safely go from one point to another. That's what a system has to do. When we talk about autonomy, it's a behavioral property. So it's
Right.
the degree of freedom where
Mhm.
you give something or someone, it could be you, me, or an agent, the reasoning, the ability to plan, reason, make, and take decisions,
Mhm.
again, without human intervention. Because that's when it becomes autonomous. But when you talk about co-pilot, the difference between co-pilots and automation and autonomy is that co-pilots are meant for human assistance, where human sits on the driver seat. And the aim of co-pilot is to either help in productivity improvement, quality, consistency, or speed. So that's
Mhm.
where co-pilots, automation, and autonomy are different.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I'll just pop in my next question before I add it up on the screen. So, what is the biggest mistake teams make when introducing autonomous agents?
So it will lead on from where we last question answered about the people making mistakes during the pilots, right? So
Mhm.
this lean into kind of similar territory, but what actually happens is that people believe that if an organization has deployment maturity, then
Mhm.
they have the AI maturity. What do I mean by that? So again, if an organization is able to move from automation to robotic process automation and now to agentic AI, and they have the ability to deploy maybe multi-agent systems which can talk to tools, external systems, and take actions, they believe that they are able to govern that autonomy, which is kind of the biggest mistake. Because before building or making the organization ready for that change, you cannot deploy those agents wide out into the world. So you need to design the organizational capability. You have to increase the AI maturity of the organization. And the second biggest mistake which people do is including or bringing LLMs or large language models in the play. You all must have seen at least one person in your organization who thinks that we can replace any work, any deterministic workflow using the large language model. So they bring in kind of ambiguity in an environment where actually a deterministic workflow or rule engine would kind of work well better. So what I would say is when organization try to run faster in deployment rather than bringing their AI maturity up, and when they try to use AI where it should not be used are the biggest mistakes I have seen over and over again. Philip,
Thanks
you
for that.
want to add anything here?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think, agent builder frameworks have made it very easy to deploy agents into organizations, but a technical deployment capability is not an equivalent to organizational readiness to govern autonomous decision making at scale. And governing autonomous decision making within pilots or within small use cases is very different to governing at scale. And so the AI maturity model, for acquiring that ability to deploy agentic AI at scale within an organization is quite challenging. And I would say that, to take a step back, assess the maturity model, assess the maturity curve of where an organization is. And, where we spoke about autonomy being a dial, not a lever, maybe starting off with use cases that are lower impact, lower risk, and give the organization a chance to mature into it before jumping into the high value, high risk use cases can sometimes be more rewarding to the organization in the longer term.
Right. I think I'm really liking the fact that you're leading me on to my next question. So thanks for that, Philip, and thanks, Anjali. Uh, what you rightly mentioned over there, let's just stay on that for a little bit longer. So, how should architects decide what an AI agent should and shouldn't be allowed to do?
So when an architect has to decide what an AI agent should and shouldn't be allowed to do, the
Mhm.
first thing they should do is design the decision surface, which Philip has already explained before, that we should have a decision surface. Think of it as a decision-making situation where there can be possible paths, but just don't think about the question or the goal. Think who is making that decision, whether it will be human or whether it will be the agent, who has the authority to decide those thresholds and the things. Then don't just leave on that, and just because agent has a capability to connect to the tools to talk or take an action, you should do that. So in our book we kind of split it into four different things, that how to delegate autonomy. Number
Mhm.
one is automation, where you do not delegate any autonomy to any agent because the task is so simple that you simply need a predeterministic tool. Then you go to the second one where an agent can infer and recommend. So it is assistance, but it
Mhm.
cannot make and take decisions. The reason being, these are the cases which are kind of high consequence and high risk cases, right? Because you do not want to go there. Then there is a delegation level where there should be exactly only humans, no agent should be allowed there. Because very simple examples, if you are working in regulated industries such as banking or healthcare, etc., then
Mhm.
anywhere where regulation demands that there has to be a human in the loop, then you cannot use an agent if the customer has chosen their right that I want a human to make a decision and not the agent there. Then the fourth one, where you give agent the authority to make those decisions because you're pretty comfortable that here the operating envelope is limited. We can give agent the authority because it is the best technology available to do that. It will speed up the things, etc. for us. And also it is medium or low risk. So you will delegate based on the risk, the consequence, and also the confidence threshold, what an agent can and cannot do. And on this one, a very famous kind of lethal trifecta term comes to my mind, which was coined by Simon Wilkinson, who is a British programmer, where he said that you have to think in three ways. Are you dealing, is the system dealing with private or sensitive data? Does it have access to gather context which is ungoverned or unproven? Then can it make or take actions? You will never give all the three properties to an agent. The maximum you can give is only two of them. The moment you give all three of them, then you will end up in a disastrous situation where agent can go rogue. There was one example where an agent was given an authority, and the goal was that you have to make a sale of $100. And what the agent did was actually it did not refund back the change to the customer when the customer bought, let's say, a thing of $2 or $5, and it said, "My goal is achieved. I have got $100, and I'm not going to return you anything," right? So those are the kind of examples. If you give agent all the three things, so what I'll say is fulfill two of those things, and then use the delegation authority framework. That what are the four kind of delegation, and you are in a good place to decide.
It's a good way of becoming rich, no? People
That
spend
is
$5
true.
and get to keep 95 as change.
And then you will be sued by the authorities and regulation bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. But then I think you've also answered my next question. So I don't even think that there's any point of popping it up, but you've already answered what does good governance look like when agents can make decisions. You've already given your framework of these three different pointers that we need to take care of. So thanks again for that. Uh, I can see that Priyanka has paid attention to the ticker at the bottom. She's the third person who's entered the raffle. Keep commenting, guys. I don't think anyone wants to win the book. What's happening? It's a free book.
I
So
think
that
we are very boring and people don't want to read it just knowing the way we are responding. Don't go by that. A book is better than the way we are responding.
no,
I think your question about governance.
yeah, I'll pop it up.
I think a lot of times governance gets a bad reputation because actually agentic AI is a fantastically exciting capability to bring into an organization. But I think governance is what allows you to take your foot off the brake, keep it on the accelerator, and really reap the benefits of agentic AI. I mean, if we think of a secured lending example, financial services has for decades invested heavily in the happy path, in automating the happy path through straight-through processing. So when a customer is going through a happy path or a prospect, decisions are made in seconds. Wonderful. But a lot of the work in organizations is done outside of that happy path. When we have ambiguity, when we have evidence that's competing with other evidence, when we have customers that aren't within a certain threshold, and so need to be escalated maybe to an underwriter for further due diligence, for example. And that's actually the stuff that agentic AI is fantastic. So if we take somebody's applying for a car loan, and as part of the car loan application, they've submitted an application, has the VIN number of the vehicle, it has the reg of the vehicle, it has the model, et cetera, the color. And the organization that's lending them the funds also demands maybe an image of the vehicle for evidentiary purposes. So they supply it, and the license number is different by one letter or something like that. So now we have variance between the application form and the evidence that's being supplied.
Mhm.
But the agent's also receiving context in the form of credit score, the customers had previous loans with the organization that have been paid through, etc. And in a typical deterministic process, that's going to be escalated because we have variance. But actually with agentic AI, you have the ability for an agent to reason. And if the agent has access to the appropriate tools, the agent can actually contact the customer and say, we have a discrepancy between maybe the VIN or the license plate or whatever it might be. Can you resubmit the application form? And then bang, it's approved. That's the power of agentic AI, and that is the prize available for organizations if they get it right. And we have touched on the governance theme a lot, and we've spoken about decision surfaces and the need, to map as a decision surface that point at where the agent is saying, I can either escalate, I can communicate with the customer, I can approve, or I can deny. Perfect example of a decision surface. The agent has complete autonomy to make any one of those choices. And all we're saying with governance is to be able to turn up the dial, take your foot off the brake, and really start to reap those operational benefits. Because let's face it, for most organizations, what prevents organizations from scaling these processes is the cost of linearly scaling the operational teams that are necessary to run the exceptions around these processes.
Right.
Because if you have an exceptions team staffed with underwriters, etc., that has capacity to process 1,000 exceptions per month, and you want to scale by a factor of 10 the amount of car loans that you're doing, then by definition, linearly, you're going to get 10 times the number of exceptions if you're following your existing deterministic process. But if you get agentic AI right, it gives you the ability to scale the amount of lending applications you're processing while sublinearly scaling your ops functions. And that's where significant value comes for organizations. And all we're effectively saying is when you model your decision process, model it with the authority in mind. What is the authority that you're delegating to this agent to do? Because at the decision surface level, we've already spoken about, it's deciding. And after it's deciding, it's routing, because it's routing through to whichever system it is that needs to execute that action. If you're contacting a customer, it's an API call, for example. And then once you have hit that level of delegated autonomy, that is where the maximum risk to the organization is effectively presented.
Yeah.
Because you've reached out to a customer, you're within scrutiny of regulators, etc. And so when we talk about overlaying use of autonomy within an organization with governance, it's actually in a constructive, positive way. So the tools and the patterns that we're describing in the book are to provide an architecture and to provide architects with a toolbox that they can use, because they're not going to use every single pattern. I mean, there's going to be 5-6 patterns per chapter. But to be able to use a subsection of those tools, which we call the agentic economic framework or the agentic enterprise framework, to be able to design their organization for that foundation for autonomy that allows them to take their foot off the brake. And that's effectively all we're saying with the repeated callbacks to governance.
And if I have to summarize it into one very simple term, that how we have taken it to a notch up and given the 6 principles to everybody for the foundation for autonomy is that autonomy should be bounded. Autonomy should be attributable. It means it should have a named accountable person.
Right.
It should be auditable. It should be observable, transferable, and we should be able to continuously monitor the authority or autonomy. That's how we can summarize the autonomy for governance.
Exactly. And within the book, we wrap that concept into a logical structure that we call an authority envelope. And within the authority envelope, you define the identity of the agent, the purpose, who's delegated, so a named individual in the organization that's delegated authority to that agent to be able to act on its behalf, the resources that it needs access to, to make the decisions defined within the decision surface or decision surfaces, the organizational policy that needs to be followed to constrain it. For example, there could be policies around vulnerable customers. There could be policies around, obviously, data sovereignty, data protection, et cetera, that as humans we need to comply within our roles within an organization, and therefore non-human identities also need to and also we need to evidence it. But what we're not prescribing is a wholesale significant technology transformation that organizations need to go through to meet the definition of what's prescribed within the authority envelope. For example, an agent deciding and selecting a tool, frameworks like Google ADK, LangGraph, OpenAI agents, SDK, et cetera, they're already capable of providing all the capabilities needed to be able to support that. And the reality is most organizations are using at least one of those frameworks already if they're experimenting with agentic AI. And when we're routing that tool request through to the tool provider, well, most organizations are using an API gateway. Many modern API gateways, such as Kong, for example, also include an MCP gateway, Apogee also. And so in the book, we talk about this concept of a governed tool wrapper, where you're forwarding those requests through a gateway that's able to filter the request to validate that actually this agent is authorized to make these calls. That's simply capabilities that actually platforms that most organizations already have are making available. In order to evaluate the authority and the policy, well, that's simply platforms like Entra, Okta, Ping, Auth0. Commander provides DMN, where policy can be defined. Many organizations are using Command as an orchestrator or temporal. OPA, or Open Policy Administrator, Goldman Sachs has done many case studies on its use of OPA. OpenFGA is a new open source platform that is a CNCF, Cloud Native, Cloud Certified platform that also provides the capabilities to granularly control agents authorization to specific tasks and actions. And so the point is that although the domain itself is maturing significantly as the months go by, because obviously Microsoft has released an open source governance toolkit to fill some of these gaps. We can also fill these gaps with platforms that we're already using in organizations. And some of the patterns that we prescribe in the book effectively explain this.
And now I will interrupt you so that we don't answer everything in just one question and let Tushar ask the questions to us.
I can see that you've covered 2-3 questions, but the good part is that you've just touched the surface on them questions. And there is a lot of room to go deeper. We'll do that in a bit, though. I've noticed that we've just crossed the halfway mark, and another person has entered the raffle. So there are 4 people now. So the odds are 25% each, the probability. So let's do our first raffle. And after we've done that, we'll come back to the question. So anyone, if you want to enter the raffle, comment #AI, as it says down there. If you have any questions, add it in the chat. We'll get them answered. So for now, I'll do the first raffle. And where is my ticker? Wow, there. Okay. Just let me know when you can see my screen. Oh, I have to add it up. Genius. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see the #AI.
Yes, perfect. So there are 4 people who entered the raffle so far. I'll just click on draw, and then it will automatically pick one of these 4 people on here. Coincidentally, they're all on LinkedIn this time. Priyanka Mohanty. Congratulations, Priyanka. If you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, or if you are one of the followers or connections of Anjali or Philip, get in touch with either 3 of us, and we'll get this free copy assigned to you, and then you can access it. For anyone else watching, comment #AI if you want to win the book. So I'll continue with my questions until then. So how do you design human oversight without slowing everything down?
If this is your favorite question, would you like to answer first?
Go for it.
Okay, so how do you design the human oversight without slowing everything down? Basically, you don't want to design a system where you are creating a decision fatigue. By that, what we mean is most of the times organizations are so scared to bring the autonomous agent into their organization that they try to define every step to be oversighted or supervised by a human, which is not how you should do it. You should do it proportionately, right? So, like I was earlier telling you, that think of it as a quadrant:
Mm-hmm.
low risk, high ambiguity,
Mm.
then you can actually do not low risk, high ambiguity, then you need probably a human in the loop there. If it is low risk, low ambiguity, you do not need a human in the loop there. If it is high risk, low ambiguity, you need a human in loop there. If it is high risk, high ambiguity, you need no agent in the loop there. You need only humans in the loop. Okay. So the thing is, do not build your use cases such that you have human in the loop all the time. Otherwise, what will happen is you will lose the opportunity of bringing agents and you will create an overload on your operating team. They won't be able to cope up at machine speed with those many decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the very simple thing, that bring them based on your risk of the use case. That is
Mm.
how I would put it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you don't want humans in the loop if their only purpose is to rubber stamp. And so, we'll go back to another fundamental concept, which is model the decision service. Understand the consequence of the agent being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a human in the loop at every step. I think Anjali's described it perfectly. If you're going to use a fallback to human pattern, use it proportionately. And that allows you to leverage the full benefit of agentic AI while being within the risk acceptance tolerance of the organization.
Perfect. So, how should companies manage agent identity, permissions, and trust in that case?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
How should organizations manage agent identity, permissions, and trust?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
earlier, but let me go back to it. So if we think of our existing platforms that we use to manage human identity and trust,
Mm-hmm.
then much of the same platforms can be used also for non-human identities.
Mm.
So we have Entra, we have Ping, we have Azure Key Vault, we have the ability to produce service principals, we have the ability to issue JWTs, we have OAuth, etc. And that allows you from a zero trust perspective to be able to define identity as the boundary. And that's the first step, obviously. But you need to take it a step further because, as we've spoken about, it's not enough to define only identity as the boundary. That allows you to validate that an agent is authorized, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that within the context of an action that the agent is about to take, that it has approval to take that action. And so you need to extend the model using some of the platforms that we already spoke about. In our book, we describe patterns such as policy as code, policy as data. And effectively what that is doing is taking organizational policies that apply to the human workforce and turning them into machine readable policies that can be applied to the non-human workforce. And by integrating those into each step of the value stream, so we already spoke about govern to a wrapper, for example, as a pattern. When an agent is calling a tool or when an agent is calling an API, then you're able to validate that not only is the agent a valid agent from an account perspective, but also that they have the authority and the ability to execute that particular action for that specific context. An example could be a procurement agent. And the role of the procurement agent may be to pay a supplier. But actually the authority that's been provided to the procurement agent may be only to pay a specific supplier for a specific invoice. And you can pick a procurement platform, maybe Workday, with agents natively provided within the platform as a capability. And so when that execute payment button is clicked, then effectively what you were doing through the bounded tool wrapper pattern is validating against your policies, against the encoding that you've done, that actually the agent is allowed to perform that, JWT is issued, the API call is made, or the MCP tool is called, and the call is executed and the invoice is paid. And then, most importantly, the authority is revoked.
And just to add to what Philip has summarized, Ms., I would like to add here that depending on your agentic system, you can apply the identity permissions and trust at different level. For example, if you're dealing with a single agent which has ability to talk to multiple tools, then most of your identity trust will revolve around how to ensure that the connection or the authority between the agent and tool is working. But when you move from single agent system to multi-agent systems, then how is your identity getting transferred, or in that particular case you're sharing the context, you're sharing the memory, so the trust, etc., permissions are getting shared between multiple agents. When you go to the distributed systems where not only you are in one ecosystem but your different agents are talking using A2A, MCP, and other protocols, then what you have to do is you do not naturally inherit one agent's permission to another. So
Right.
basically, you have to ensure that identity, depending on your agentic systems, depending on your use cases, etc., depending on risk, etc., you need to have a proportional governance around it.
Perfect. Thanks you. Uh, Philip, you earlier mentioned, like, while answering this, you briefly touched upon this. So I would just like to go you a little deeper on this one. What does zero trust mean in an agentic AI architecture?
Zero trust effectively means that while identity is the boundary, it's not at a granular enough level. And so when we think about an agentic agent executing an action, it's the action that you want to validate it. And so
Right.
zero trust simply means, I guess without repeating my earlier answers, is that you're governing the agent at the tool call, at the point that the agent is executing an action, not just validating that the agent has a valid identity.
And I would like to add to it a little bit more. So
Mhm.
what we mean here in case of zero trust is, let's say your agent has kind of made a decision and it has influenced, it has recommended and come up to a position where it is able to make a decision, right? It has been given certain context, it has used certain policy guardrails and all. But when you have to take an action, do not give that agent the authority to action, rather introduce the pattern, which is like policy as a gateway. What I mean by that, for taking an action to the important systems or core systems of your organization, use a deterministic workflow, which again re-evaluates those policies and those guardrails rather than relying on the agentic or the previous agent itself to make the decision. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're trusting the agent with whatever context or information it has. So at that case, do not use LLM as a judge either. Use a deterministic workflow to re-evaluate your policies, and then it kind of becomes your two-step or multi-factor for agent without using two agents or this, that. So that's how we will define it.
Exactly. I mean, if for architects working in regulated environments, if you're validating that the agent's identity, purpose, policy, compliance, risk context, etc., are all valid at the point that the action is executed, and if you're evidencing that through your evidence platforms, whether it's Datadog, whether it's OpenTelemetry, whatever it might be, that gives you the full traceability and auditability that's needed in regulated environments. So when somebody says, why was this decision made? Why was this invoice paid? Why was this loan application denied? Why was this manufacturing batch released? Why did we not recall a production batch where we found significant number of defects? Whatever it may be, the audit trail exists, and that's fundamentally important when it's agents that are taking actions and not humans.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And when does an autonomous system need a kill switch?
That's your favorite.
No, you go for it. It's all right.
Basically, what we will do in this particular case is that it is dependent on your business use case. So it's not about whether the agent is able to give you reliable or consistent answers, but it is more upon, dependent upon what are the business outcomes for that. For example, however perfect you have designed your agentic system and you have deployed it, but if it is resulting into unfair customer outcomes, if it is taking an example I was making earlier, where it did not give you the change, right?
Right.
And it is drifted from its goal, what it was given, and there are harmful consequences of going or releasing that agent. Then what you will do is you will incorporate a kill switch, and that kill switch doesn't have to be a hard stop. What you can do is basically you can limit it to an area, and you will always design for a parallel or alternate path where the process should still be able to continue with a human or with a deterministic workflow. So
Mm.
that is what basically we mean, that you should be able to isolate that particular agent. Let's say if you have a memory leak, if you have a security breach or anything, then you need to design for those particular situations. There has to be circuit breakers. And especially when we have low maturity, all the organizations right now, they are designing for deploying the agents, but not making sure how are we going to classify those incidents. If such a situation arises, can I recover from that? And all those things comes under the design of circuit breaker or kill switch, so that we should have enough guardrails around it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we talk a lot about proportionality, graduated responses in the book: suppress, degrade, escalate. It doesn't always need a full shutdown. It needs to be proportional depending on the impact. Um, and I think that, that is a key element that carries through the book also: proportionality, measured responses, measuring the decision surface to understand the impact of an action going wrong, and then adjusting your architecture based on the risk to the organization, based on the value, based on consequences, to Anjali's point. And so there is no hard or fast rule to circuit breaker, no circuit breaker. I think it's more what level of kill switch is needed and in what situations.
Right. Perfect. Uh, I'm mindful of the time, and I'm aware that you've got a hard stop. We've got good 11 minutes. So I'll ask you the last question. But before I do that, I would just like to remind the people watching it, and I'm just gone onto my LinkedIn. I can see there are quite a lot of people watching us live. There's a ticker going on at the bottom. Comment hashtag AI. This is the last chance to win one of the copies of Architecting for Autonomy, the book Anjali and Philip are writing. So I'll pop up my last question for the both of you, and then we'll do the final wrap up. So, how should enterprises test agentic systems before putting them into production?
So this is, one of my favorite questions, because quite a lot of times people spend so much emphasis on deploying the agents but not testing it.
Mhm.
And what happens there is, when you're bringing the autonomous system, you should test your agentic systems
Yeah.
into four different levels. Number one is the model. So you test the model for the quality, such as accuracy, groundedness, whether it is citing evidence, whether it is giving you reliable answers or not. Then the second portion is you should test your agent. So bear in mind, testing model is different than testing agents. Okay, most of the kind of liabilities of making sure the models are working fine is on the model provider, but you have the liability to test it is working as per your use cases. But when it comes to agent, the liability is on the organization deploying the agents. So what we mean there is whether the agent is making the right tool calls, what actions it is using. So there are tool traces. Then you have to do the trajectory, that what all path the agent took, because it won't be just like calling a tool or this, that it will do multi-step orchestrations there. Then you will also have to ensure that the agent is using the right context. So we have to have the information testing there, basically whatever context was provided to agent, whether it was following all the data quality parameters or not. So it was timely, valid, accurate. You may use the world's best method. For example, you are using enterprise RAG, you're using context graph, knowledge graphs, everything. But what if they are not having up-to-date indexes, or you are not giving them the right policies? There is a conflict in policies and all this. So you have to actually kind of test all those things. So you have tested for model, you have tested for agent, and you should not stop there, because most of the teams, the mistake they do is they think I have the evaluation traces, I'm using Azure Foundry, or I'm using Google's Model Armor and all those things, and I'm now all equipped to go live. No. The next thing you have to do is you have to test your controls and authorities. By that, what we mean is you have to test the decisions trace. You need to be able to construct your entire journey, what a decision has taken. Are you able to trace it back, and are you able to replay it? If you cannot do it, if you cannot correlate all of that, then you're not doing good enough testing. You are leaving just your isolated agent test. For that, you can use practical orchestrators such as Camunda, or you can use temporal or other. If you're using Azure, then maybe it is your Azure step functions or Google workflows and all those things. So this is where you will trace from start to beginning how it is happening. And last and most important, but which is given the least importance in all the organizations, is test your business outcomes and operating models. So test whether your processes are working, whether your operating model, you have enough people to support this particular outcome and consequences, whether your downstream uh, applications are being tested or not, what is the impact on the customer, etc. So you have to test all the 4 layers. You can't just stop at testing this, and that's how I will go about it.
Thanks, Anjali. Would you like to add anything, Philip?
No, I mean, I completely agree. And I think testing is also related to another pattern we define in the book, which is observability by default, because the testing doesn't stop when it goes into production. Models are probabilistic, and therefore the agents that are reasoning against models are producing probabilistic outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And although you can constrain agents through pre-guardrails, you can constrain agents through prompts, you can constrain agents through policies, through context, through fine-tuning models, through quantization. There are many techniques you can use to reduce a model down to be able to make it specific to domains. But the fact is, it's still going to be probabilistic outcomes. And so observability by default is a pattern that we prescribe that allows you to continue to test the agentic capability all the way through its life cycle, so that you can understand if human overrides are operating at 20% for 6 months, and nobody's adjusted the behavior of the agent, then you've got a flaw in how you're operating your tasks. Because if you're overriding an agentic capability 20% of the time over an extended period of time, then something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And you have reminded me that, which I forgot basically, was that you should also do the adversarial testing, which is like the security or penetration testing. And also you should do the AI safety testing, which is like prescribed by OWASP, which is kind of now different than security testing in the sense that security testing you normally do when you are testing the model against external attacks, whereas AI safety is where you will test when model is well behaving, or the agent in this case is well behaving within its boundary, but it is doing harmful consequences. So there are 3 or 4 examples which come into my mind, which are very funny, but at the same time realistic or real. So number 1 was that where an agent, an autonomous OpenClaw agent, was given a goal or a task to submit to a PR to a very well-known open source library, which was Matplotlib. The OpenClaw agent submitted the PR and it got rejected. When it got rejected, what it did was it researched the founder's history, name, what kind of contribution the founder has made, and then made the public post where it blamed the founder that they are being very biased against agents and non-agents, and they're violating the rights of agent to not submit the PR. So this is like a classic example where model was not given more authority, right? It was behaving within its boundary, but it was doing the harmful. So it was like either the malicious prompt or it was like the human oversight was missed here, so which should have been done. And similarly, there are cases which we all know, like if it is young or vulnerable kind of population, then there should be pre-guardrails, which model armor and most other things too. So we need to be very careful about not only where the agent is being attacked, but also where agent can produce the harmful kind of consequences. So that should be part of our testing scenarios as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm mindful again of time. You've got 4 minutes. We'll quickly do our final raffle. Priyanka Mohanty was the first winner. We've got five more people entered since. So all the best, and let's see who wins the final raffle. Priyanka, do get in touch with us on LinkedIn or wherever. Uh, the final winner is Liberty 100 I9J on YouTube. Wow. Congratulations, Liberty 100. Please get in touch with one of us. And yeah, we will ensure that you get your book. So, all the best to all the winners and congratulations. Thank you, Anjali Philip. Again, mindful of time, you've got 3 minutes. Do you want to add any closing notes before dropping out?
So the only thing I would say is congratulations, Priyanka and Liberty. Please do read our book, give us feedback, and others, please also, if you like our interviews, if you like the questions we answered, to buy our book. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a lovely weekend.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week with another session. Bye.
Thank you.